Welcome to the Self-Love Model. On this podcast, we have open-hearted and honest conversations about all things self-love and the journey of self-discovery. This podcast is for those on an everlasting journey of their own evolution, and most importantly, a safe space for us to heal together. I'm your host, Sid, and welcome to your self-love session. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Self-Love Model. Today, your girl's got her glasses on because class is in session, besties. Today, we're doing a little bit more of an educational episode, which has been a minute since I've done more of an educational episode. I feel like my recent episodes have been really just updating you guys on what's been going on in my personal life and just catching you guys up because I've been a little inconsistent, but we're getting back to it and I'm slowly finding my rhythm again. So today we are doing an educational episode. And as you guys can tell by the topic, we are talking about attachment styles. And before we get started on today's topic, I want to do a quick little disclaimer because I am not a licensed professional. I'm not a licensed therapist. I am simply a gal who is on a mission to heal herself and those around her. So it is through my own lived-in experience, my own personal research, and my therapy journey that I've compiled this knowledge to share with you guys today. And today I wanted to talk about attachment styles because recently I actually was hanging out with a couple girlfriends, which I know they're most likely watching this right now. So hello, you guys know who I'm talking about. I love you guys. Thank you for being such a support and light in my life. But yeah, I recently had a conversations with some girlfriends and I brought up attachment styles. And two of my girlfriends actually had never heard of attachment styles, which in that moment I was like, ooh, like I love a moment when I get to share some of my knowledge, like drop some knowledge bombs on my friends. So it was like a cool moment. I'm like, ooh, it's been a while since I've like talked about attachment styles. So after that conversation, I felt really inspired by it. And I decided, you know what, let's do a podcast episode because honestly, a lot of times, like when I do podcast episodes, like the topics I talk about are typically inspired by either my own life, what I'm going through, or by just my conversations with people and like what gets brought up in those conversations. That's typically how I get inspired for my podcast. So after this conversation, I decided, you know what, let's refresh my memory. So I went ahead and did a little research and I just feel like this is such a good topic. By gaining a better understanding of our attachment style, it can really impact our relationships moving forward. To get started, I feel like we need to really have an understanding of what attachment is. Attachment is essentially how we bond with other people. And if you actually Google it, this is what attachment is according to Google. So I'm just going off like the AI overview. And it says that attachment is the deep, enduring emotional bond between individuals, especially between an infant and caregiver, crucial for survival, security, and healthy social emotional development, influencing how we form relationships throughout life with styles like which we're going to get into. So I'm going to just pause right there. So now that we have the basic understanding of what attachment is, we're going to go ahead and get into attachment styles. So attachment styles was actually, let me get in my notes real fast. So the study of attachment actually goes way back to the 1930s. It was rooted in the groundbreaking work of psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Their research focused on early childhood bonds, especially the relationship between a child and their primary giver, and how those early experiences shape the way we relate to others later in life, which makes so much sense when you start to think about it. I feel like a lot of times how we relate to others and how we move in the world all starts early in our lives. because that's like when things really come into form for us. That's when our brains are developing and when we're learning. So it really makes sense like how our caregiver and how our relationship with our caregiver was and how that can impact our future relationships if you think about it, right? So there is actually 4 attachment styles. And the 4 main ones are secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. So there's 4 of them. And today we're gonna go ahead and go through all of them so you guys can have a really good understanding of each of the attachment styles and slowly figure out which one is yours, like which one you resonate with, and gaining that knowledge, like moving forward. Each attachment style, there's ways that you can improve because ultimately our goal is that we want to work towards a secure attachment style. And another thing that I wanted to know before moving on to is that attachment styles are not fixed, meaning that maybe right now in your life you feel like you have more of like an anxious attachment style. By knowing that, maybe in this phase, but like in another phase of your life, you could have more of a secure attachment or you could have an avoidant. I think that it just depends on your experiences and the relationships that you have in your life. And again, you can work to change your attachment styles. Earlier this year, if you guys watched my last episode, I really shared with you guys how my year went and some of the things that I went through and the growth I've had. And something that I actually really worked on this year was my attachment style. And when I decided to go to therapy back in May, that was actually the main topic that my therapist and I worked on was my attachment styles, because I started therapy to work on my interpersonal relationships because that was something that I felt like I was struggling with. And as we looked into my interpersonal relationships, that was what my therapist had brought up she asked me if I had ever heard of attachment styles and if I knew what my attachment style was. And I knew I had heard of attachment styles and I knew what my attachment style was, but it wasn't something that I really looked that deeply into, and it had been a while since I really thought about it. So I love that she immediately brought that up, and that was she went through each of them with me, and through that I was able to identify which one I resonated with most. And once we figured out which attachment style I had, when I started working with my therapist, my attachment style was very much anxious attachment. And once we figured that out, we were able to dive deeper. Okay, so now that I know that I have an anxious attachment style, let's dive deeper and look at the root. And she had me go back to, my early childhood years, and we went through my caregivers. So for most of you guys, your caregiver was likely your mom. So you would look at the relationship between you and your mom and what that was like and how that contributed to your now attachment style. And for me, my case was a little different actually, because my caretaker throughout my life really changed a lot. As a kid, it was my mom and dad, but then my mom and dad had their disabilities and my dad passed when I was young. So really it changed to my grandparents. They were my primary caretaker. But then I also had a helper that lived with us that I was extremely, extremely attached to the point where anytime that she would have a day off, because this helper that we had, she lived with us and she took care of me, and her and I were literally inseparable. She was essentially my mom growing up. And I remember just growing up, she was the person that I felt safest with to be myself. And I felt emotionally, I trusted her the most. So I see her as like a primary caregiver. And then I also had my uncle who, after my dad passed away, really took over the role as my father figure. So I see that as like another caregiver. And then when I moved to America from Taiwan, I lived with my aunt and uncle's family here. So then moving here, I had another set of caregivers, you know? But then obviously that's like later in my life, so maybe that doesn't count. But with my therapist, we like basically went over each of those relationships and how each of those really impacted me. I want to share my personal experience with what I've learned from my therapy journey and my own research, because I feel like it's normal to normalize this process of going to therapy and learning about these things. But through therapy, I learned that I was very anxious in relationships and I had an anxious attachment style, which definitely translated into my friendships, into my relationship with my partner. And I was able to start identifying patterns of how that was showing up in each of my relationships. So now we're going to go ahead and go through each of the attachment styles so you guys can better understand it. And we're going to go ahead and start with the anxious attachment, because this one for me is what I'm most familiar with. So that's why we're going to just go ahead and start with this one. People who have anxious attachment tend to be overly emotional. They want friends to prove their love and commitment. And they can tend to have an emotional dependency to where their self-worth is tied to the relationship, and they start to panic when they feel like their partners are pulling away. The root causes of anxious attachment is insecurity and fear of abandonment, which that has been like one of the biggest things I've worked on through my own healing journey. It's really looking at my fear of abandonment and like just looking at the root causes and understanding it, because of my insecurity that I had. And hello, Barry, welcome. I know in the last episode, you guys really love the cats. So the cats are here and Barry just wanted to say hi to the camera apparently. But yeah, so with anxious attachment, you will have the root cause of it is your fear of abandonment. So essentially, as a kid, your primary care was very inconsistent. You develop an insecurity and the fear of abandonment. And you can develop coping mechanisms because of your fear of abandonment. And those coping mechanisms can be the constant need for reassurance and validation and an intense desire for emotional closeness. So you may exhibit clingy and possessive behaviors due to feelings of unworthiness, reluctance to be independent, which can lead to codependency, which is everything I'm talking about right now, guys, are all things that I've gone through and have had to like learn and heal from. Because back 10 years ago when Chris and I first started dating, I had really no sense of self-worth. I had very low self-esteem, and I had really no identity outside of being in a relationship with Chris. So I really, really depended on Chris for my own self-worth. Like I depended on that relationship. I was only able to regulate my emotions through my partners, through my friendships. I had no idea how to regulate my own emotions. And I needed a lot of assurance from my friends. And just, I sought out a lot of validations from the people in my life as well. And that was definitely something that I can recognize, and I can see how that has affected my relationships in the past because of how, and I think it's fine. And I had this conversation with my girlfriends too. It's fine to want validation, and validation's nice. It's nice to feel validated, right? But there is a difference between needing that and just receiving that. Like you don't need it because you have that validation from yourself, but knowing that you can still receive that validation from others is just like that energy of needing and just receiving is so different. So it's important to really learn to have your own self-worth and self-esteem and like build on that. Okay, so the first attachment style is anxious, preoccupied attachment. So with anxious, you tend to be overly emotional and you tend to seek a lot of reassurance and validations from your relationships, and you can become overly dependent on your relationships to the point of codependency. And the root cause of it is due to insecurity and fear of abandonment, because our primary care in our younger years were very inconsistent. And with anxious attachment, it can really impact our relationships because we can tend to attract emotionally unavailable partners. This is actually, people who usually are anxiously attached can tend to attract avoidant attachments, because it's like one of those like push-pull dynamic. It's the same thing with narcissists. They tend to attract people who can become codependent, because people who can become codependent tend to not be in their frame, so they don't really have a self-worth to where they feel attracted to a narcissist, someone who is so in their frame that someone who is like codependent and anxiously attached just immediately gets attached to them. And it's just that dynamic. I remember back in the day, I would do a lot of research on this because I'm someone who's like prone to being codependent, you know, back when I was starting out on this healing journey and really had no sense of self. And I found that I would be attracted to people like that. And I started to notice this dynamic. So I started to do research on it. And I'm also an empath. So an empath and narcissist, like, if you guys look it up, it's a thing that like they just attract each other. Behaviors, you can exhibit clinginess, jealousy, which can tend to push your partners away, and you can have difficulty communicating needs, leading to feeling unheard. Okay, so the second attachment style is the avoidant attachment style. So this one, again, another around 20% of people have this. This one is the complete opposite of anxious attachment, where in avoidant, you tend to be hyper independent. An avoidant attachment style is a pattern of discomfort with emotional intimacy, and you'll have a strong need for independence and difficulty trusting others. Now, the independence part can seem like a good thing, but as humans, we are wired to connect with other people, and it's good to be independent, but it's not good to be hyper independent. We want to have a good balance of both, to where it's called interdependence, I believe. So let me look it up. My friend Amanda actually brought this term up to me too earlier this year when I was going through some interpersonal relationship things and I was going to her for advice. She actually brought this up. Yeah. So interdependence is the dependence of two or more people or things on each other. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Interdependence. Okay. So people who are avoidant may have difficulty knowing their needs and feelings, and they can feel trapped when partners express needs, and they may break things off as soon as they feel like it's too much for them. So individuals with this attachment style may have experienced caregivers who were emotionally unavailable or dismissive of their emotional needs during childhood. So essentially, you weren't really taken care of as a child, to where you, as a child, basically convince yourself that you don't have needs and that you can't depend on your caregiver. So you started depending solely on yourself, which can create that hyper independence and create that lack of trust in others, due to what you learned from your primary caregiver. So with the avoidant attachment style, it can impact your relationships because you can have difficulty forming lasting, deeply intimate bonds. Your partner might feel shut out or that their needs are ignored. It can lead to cycles of pushing away partners who desire more closeness. So the avoidant attachment style is where you can have hyper independence and it's rooted from emotionally unavailable or dismissive caregivers. Okay, and the third attachment style is fearful avoidant attachment. And this one can be known as disorganized attachment. This one, it's a little bit more complicated. It represents a complex interplay of anxious and avoidant tendencies. So with disorganized, you can have a combination of both anxious and avoidant. So individuals with this attachment style may experience internal conflicts, simultaneously desiring emotional closeness while fearing the vulnerability that comes with intimacy. Disorganized attachment often stems from early experiences of trauma or inconsistent caregiving, creating a profound sense of uncertainty in relationships. Individuals with this attachment style may struggle with trust issues, facilitating between a deep desire for connection and a fear of being hurt or rejected. So with a disorganized attachment, this is essentially you desire that closeness, but you fear it at the same time. And you can, with the disorganized, you tend to have that push-pull dynamic. That's something that you can experience a lot to where you want that closeness with your partner, but once you receive it, that's when you're like, whoa, I'm actually not sure if I wanted that type of thing. So it's creating that push-pull dynamic, and you can tend to feel unsafe in relationships even when love is present. So this attachment style often comes from environments that felt chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally unsafe. So yeah, I remember when I was like doing this, like learning about attachment styles and doing my quizzes, I was really feeling like I could identify, like anxious for sure. I was like, oh yeah, anxious, definitely. But there were certain scenarios where I was like, maybe like I could see myself being like a little bit avoidant. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm like disorganized because I could see like both popping up. But anxious was definitely like my main attachment. And as I was preparing for this episode, you know, outside of the research that I did, I decided to take a quiz as well, just to like see where I was at now. I do feel like I'm in a lot better place since working with my therapist and doing my own work. I feel like the relationships I have now, they feel very secure to me. And like just within this year, I feel like I've really learned to not need external validation, and I feel like my relationships now just feel so much healthier, and I love that for me. So yeah, I took this quiz on Blossom Up. So some of the stuff that I've been like reading off of my laptop to you guys are like from Blossom Up. And okay, I'm so annoyed because when I was looking up quizzes to take, obviously I wanted to find a free one because I want you guys to take the free quiz, you know? But in this one, I swear, it was like one of the first one that popped up. It was sponsored, whatever. But it said like in the description, it was a free quiz. I thought I was taking a free quiz, and of course they got my ass. And at the end of the quiz, it was like, oh, it's gonna cost you like $190 to get your full results. So yeah, you know, I was like, whatever, I already like took the quiz, I'll just pay this. I will just see this as an investment, you know? So yeah, I took the quiz on this website called Blossom Up, which if you guys want to pay for it, I do think that it's very insightful. It gave me a lot of stuff to like look at. But it does look like it's like a subscription. So I'm about to cancel this like as soon as I'm done with this episode, just to make sure I don't keep getting charged. But I will see if after the episode, I'll find another one on here that is free and I'll link it in the show notes. I'll do this for you guys because I love and care for you guys, okay? So yeah, I'll make sure to find an actual free one and just like link that in the show notes for you. But yeah, so I took this quiz and I got secure attachment. Yay! With my secondary one being anxious. So I definitely still have that in me. And like I said, I feel like a part of our healing journey is that it's a never ending journey, and different lessons will continue to show up through different people, things, until we like fully learn it. And usually it can take, a really long time. Okay. So yeah, so I took this quiz. I'm trying to see where I was going with that. Because my camera actually started to overheat, so I had to pause for a sec. Okay. Okay, anyway, we will come back to that. But I want to go ahead and cover our last attachment style, which I've been talking about throughout this episode, which is secure attachment. And secure attachment is ultimately the goal. So securely attached people generally feel safe and closeness and independence. They communicate their needs clearly, trust themselves and others, and they don't abandon themselves to keep a relationship. Secure attachment, it's where you have a good foundation of trust and intimacy. And in a secure attachment, you are able to trust others and you're able to really form these long-lasting, meaningful relationships. And individuals with a secure attachment style have typically experienced consistent and responsive caregiving during their formative years. This reliability has instilled in them a confident expectations that others will be available and responsive in times of needs. So yeah, ultimately, this is the goal. And when I was working with my therapist, this is where she was getting me to. So I'm happy to say after taking my quiz and my journey with therapy, I do feel like I'm at a secure attachment style place now. Why was that like difficult to say? And that's okay if you feel like you are not there yet and you're like, I identify with the other ones. And that's the beautiful thing, is that now that you have the awareness, which awareness is step one of this process, is understanding where you're at in your journey. So now that you have an understanding, you've identified the style of attachment. Now you can move forward and work on that attachment, and you can have a better understanding of yourself. This is why it's so important to do this work, because then we can gain understanding, and knowing this can really impact our relationships, our future relationships, and help us form these meaningful relationships, because I truly feel like that is what life is about. We are wired to connect with others. We are wired to be in community. And I remember a long time ago, I heard this quote on a podcast. I can't remember what podcast it was on because I listened to a lot. And he said that, show me the quality of your relationships and I'll show you the quality of your life. And that has always stuck with me, because he really talked about just the importance of our relationships in our lives. Like, if we have really high quality relationships, that typically will really impact our day-to-day life and our health. So this is why I was really excited when I felt inspired to talk about this topic, just because I feel like if I already have 2 people within my circle of friends who didn't know about this, how many more people out there have never heard of this, right? So here we are, bringing some light to this topic and helping you guys. And I'm hoping that through this episode, you guys can really begin to reflect on your own attachment style and what you can do moving forward to improve that, and for you guys to have better relationships, right? I wrote down some steps that we can take to cope and heal. So if you're someone who identify with anxious attachment, step number 1 is to have self-awareness, which for all the attachment style is self-awareness. That is always going to be the first step. It's just recognizing the pattern is the first step. And then mindfulness and self-regulation. So learning to manage intense emotions alone. So if you have anxious attachment, it's really important for you to start learning to regulate your own emotions. And I've mentioned in previous podcast episodes, like I essentially went through a phase in my life where I was forced to regulate my own emotions, because on this journey of healing and growth, the journey can be quite lonely at times. You tend to lose people. People tend to come and go and phase out of your life as you're in different parts of your journey. So I've gone through phases in my journey where I had no friends. Like really, I had no friends. It was just me, myself, and I. And it was through that period of my life where I truly had no one to rely. I couldn't just text a friend and be like, oh my God, I feel awful. I feel so sad. Like I'm going through this and that. Like, how can I feel better? Or what should I do? Blah, blah, blah. Like I really had no one at that point in my life to go to. So instead of going to someone when I was feeling upset, I had to sit with my thoughts, feel them out, and learn to regulate them, basically. So I'm very grateful for that phase in my life, because I truly learned how to self-regulate. And that does not mean that we can't go to our friends for support. I think it's also really important to know that we can lean on our village, on our community when it is needed, but also knowing that we should learn to self-regulate. And then step 3 is therapy. I feel like if you have the means to invest in therapy, I think that it definitely helped me a lot. I didn't do it for a long time because I found that after a certain amount of sessions, I was feeling really good, and I was already feeling a lot better. And, I am learning to budget and living below my means. So once I felt like I got what I needed, I stopped going. But that doesn't mean in the future I won't go back to therapy. For the time being, I feel good. Things have been pretty chill. If I start to feel like I really need that support, I will definitely go back. But if you have the means to invest in therapy, I would highly recommend. It's such a nice way of really, because we have blind spots, right? So it's nice to have that other perspective from another person to help us see those blind spots and to guide us through, because a lot of times this work that we're doing is really hard. This shit is difficult to look back on our childhood. I can understand why a lot of people don't want to do this work, because it is really not easy. And then the last step for anxious attachment is healthy boundaries. So developing a stronger sense of self outside the relationship. So really learning who you are outside of your relationship. So for example, when I was with Chris the first time around after we broke up, that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know who I am. So I really went down the path and the journey of discovering who Cindy is and just learning more about myself, what makes me happy, and learning about my own needs and being able to communicate my own needs, because I found that it was really hard for me. If I was having a hard time, if I'm out with people and if someone was to ask me what do you need in this moment? How can I help you? I wouldn't even know what I needed in that moment. I would probably just go blank and just be like, I don't know, or probably just shut down. I had a really hard time knowing what my needs were. And I also had a really hard time communicating with my friends and my partner when something started to feel off for me, when a conflict arises, something starts to bother me. I usually would have a hard time of bringing that up and communicating with my partners or friends, because I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid of conflict in relationships, because I didn't want to, I had my abandonment, I had a fear of abandonment, which led me to not want to stir the relationship. I didn't want to cause conflicts because I was afraid of them leaving me if I brought something up. So I just thought it was easier for me to just get over it myself instead of bring whatever issues I had up so I can have an open communication with my friends or partner, right? And another pattern that I had recognized within myself was that a lot of times if I start to feel like a rift, like I start to feel something I don't like about my friend or my partner, I essentially, because I didn't want to bring it up, I would start to like distance myself, or a lot of times I would just cut that friend off because I felt like it felt safer for me to cut that relationship off and to be the first one to step back instead of them leaving me eventually. So I will always be the first one to like end something, like end a friendship or something, instead of just like talking about it, you know? So that was something that I learned. And these are just coping mechanisms that we developed due to our trauma or whatever fears that we have. So it's so important to like know that so then you can start to see these patterns. And then for someone who has an avoidant attachment style, something that you could do to help you heal from this is by practicing vulnerability, by gradually leaning into discomfort and allowing closeness, by just practicing being more vulnerable in your relationships and learning to communicate. So learning to express your needs and feelings even when it feels difficult. And again, therapy can really help with this as well. And then for disorganized, I feel like all the steps I mentioned will apply to you as well. So now we've gone over all the attachment styles and how they impact our relationships and ways that we can start to heal and work towards having a more secure attachment style. I want to dive into the difference between attachment and connection. I brought this up in the beginning of the episode and I told you guys we would come back to this because I feel like it's really important for us to understand the difference between attachment and connection, because attachment can sometimes be rooted in fear of loss, fear of abandonment, and fear of being alone. Whereas connection, on the other hand, is rooted in presence, choice, and mutual safety. So learning your attachment styles can really change how you relate to others, to where you used to attach to people. And now instead of being attached to people, you are connecting with other people. So it's just within that little shift that can make all the difference in our relationships and help us form meaningful relationships. Because like I've said over and over again, I'll preach this till the day I die, relationships are what makes life truly meaningful. I am such a relationship gal. I love people. And I know sometimes people can not be the greatest, but I will always choose to see the good in people. And I will always choose to be, and I will always be a people person, not a people pleaser, just a people person. I want to really wrap this up. I want to make sure we like get everything down. You guys have all the knowledge you need to move forward. But so connection is about shared experiences and mutual respect, while attachment is often focused on fulfilling personal needs through the other person. So a genuine connection brings a sense of belonging, whereas attachment can lead to anxiety, codependency, and feeling drained. So a healthy connection allows for space and individual growth, while attachment can be restrictive and require constant presence. So attachment is clinging and connection is flowing. So I think just having that knowledge really is all we need moving forward. And before we end this episode, obviously I want to give you guys a couple resources if you guys want to dive this deeper, if you guys want to dive even deeper into this topic, because like I said, I am not a professional. I'm just simply here to raise awareness, to shed light on this topic, and to just get us to start thinking about this stuff, you know? So if you guys want to dive deeper, I would recommend checking out different podcasts, you can just look up like attachment styles, and I'm sure different podcasts will come up. But the one I listened to as I was prepping for this episode was an episode by Jay Shetty where he talks about attachment styles, because Jay Shetty, he's my dude, okay? I love me some Jay Shetty. His podcast is called On Purpose with Jay Shetty, and he's just great. I love him. This dude used to be a monk, and now he just like has a podcast, and he's a very like popular and well-known thought leader. So I'm sure most of you guys have heard of him, but I'll link his episode in the show notes as well. And a well-known book about attachment styles is called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. I think that's how you say it. But again, I'll link everything in the show notes. I personally have not read the book Attached, but I've seen it pop up a lot. And as I was doing my research, that was like the #1 book that kept popping up. So yeah, my beautiful besties, that concludes the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. It's been a minute since I've done an educational episode. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening and watching. This year, I'm really making it my goal to grow my YouTube channel, because I've always been like a YouTube girly. And I remember back in the day, a little secret for you guys, I used to have a little makeup channel with my best friend and I in middle school, and we would do like the silliest skits, and part of me wishes we never took it down, because I low-key like want to watch them again. I actually think they would be hilarious to watch. I don't know that I would show anyone, but I would love them for me, you know? And we used to do makeup tutorials, and I'm like, I literally know nothing about makeup, so that's so funny to me. But yeah, I've always been a YouTube girly, so I'm really making it my goal to grow my YouTube channel more. And if you guys are watching me on YouTube, make sure you guys subscribe. I've got a lot of content coming. I've got another body series coming, which with the body series, this is where I get to combine my fitness and wellness passion into it. And I basically just train with other fitness influencers, trainers, and just people in the bodybuilding world. And we go through a workout. So it's really like an educational video plus entertaining, because, you know, you get to see how we interact. And I would like to think I'm pretty funny when I want to be. So yeah, and you get to watch, you know, pretty girls work out. Like, really doesn't get better than that. So give this video a like so I'm not just talking into the void, please and thank you. And I would love to hear what attachment style you discovered if you take a quiz, and what golden nuggets you took away from this episode. As always, share this episode on your story and tag me. Much appreciated. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here and for making it all the way to the end of the episode. You guys are truly my rock. You guys are rock stars. I love you guys. Until next time. Bye.